I had always dreamed of owning my own home, and when I found the old Victorian house at the end of Oakwood Street, I immediately fell in love with it. Despite the suspiciously low price, I brushed off any concerns, thinking I had simply found a great deal. The house was large, 3 stories high, with towering windows and a mysterious-looking attic. On my first day moving in, I spent hours unpacking and cleaning away the thick layers of dust that covered almost every surface. The house felt eerily quiet, too quiet for a neighborhood that was supposed to be lively. As night fell, I sat in the living room with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. The street outside was empty, with only the shifting shadows of trees swaying in the wind. Just as I was about to go to bed, I heard it. Footsteps coming from the floor above me. My heartbeat quickened. I lived alone. Gripping a flashlight, I slowly ascended the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. I checked every room, but there was no one there. I tried to convince myself it was just the house settling, old wood shifting with the temperature. But the sounds continued, night after night. Sometimes it was footsteps, sometimes the sound of something dragging across the floor. I began to feel like I wasn't alone. Then, on the seventh night, I woke to the sound of the attic door creaking open. My stomach dropped. With trembling hands, I climbed the stairs and saw that the attic door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open wider and shined my flashlight inside. The attic was filled with old, dust-covered belongings. In one corner, I noticed a table stacked with old photographs. I picked one up, and a chill ran down my spine. It was a picture of a family, presumably the house's previous occupants. But in the corner of the photo, standing slightly apart from the rest, was a man. A man who looked exactly like me. Different clothes, different hairstyle, but the face was mine. The air around me suddenly turned ice cold. Before I could react, a whisper echoed right beside my ear. "You finally came back." I bolted out of the attic, slamming the door shut behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. I felt something watching me. The next morning, I started researching the house's history, and what I found made my blood run cold. Decades ago, a man had mysteriously vanished from this house. No sign of struggle, no explanation. He had simply disappeared without a trace. When I found a photograph of him, my heart nearly stopped. He looked exactly like me. I don't know what this means. Am I his reincarnation? Or is this house pulling me back into something I don't understand? All I know is, I need to leave. But when I try to walk out the front door, it wouldn't open. The house wouldn't let me leave. I've always loved the sound of rain. It's soothing, a natural lullaby that wraps the world in a quiet embrace. That night, the rain poured heavily, drenching the streets and making the streetlights glow dimmer than usual. I was curled up on my living room couch, sipping a warm cup of tea while reading a book. But amidst the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows, I heard something else. A faint knock. I lifted my head and glanced toward the living room window. Behind the curtain, I could see the faint outline of a figure standing outside. My heart pounded. Who would be outside in the middle of a storm? Slowly, I stood up and approached the window. Hesitantly, I pulled the curtain aside. There was no one there. I let out a shaky breath, probably just the wind or the rain hitting the glass at an odd angle. I settled back into my seat, trying to return to my book. But then, the knock came again, this time from the kitchen window. A chill ran down my spine. I stood up, cautiously making my way to the kitchen. Peering through the curtain, I saw nothing outside. But what I did see made my stomach drop. Small, wet handprints smeared across the glass. tiny handprints. I tried to stay rational. Maybe it was just kids playing a prank. But who would be out in this weather? Determined to end the paranoia, I grabbed a flashlight and opened the back door, stepping out into the rain. I shined the beam across the yard. Nothing but wet grass and the icy chill of the storm. Then, as I turned to go back inside, my breath caught in my throat. From inside my house, standing behind the living room window, someone was staring at me. A figure, watching. From inside my own home, my body locked in place. That wasn't possible. I was alone. I was sure I had locked the door before stepping out. I rushed to the front door, my hands trembling as I flung it open. But when I stepped inside, the house was empty. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except the wet footprints on the floor. Someone, or something, had been inside. I locked every door and window, my mind racing. Maybe I was just imagining things. Maybe I was just exhausted. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the steady rhythm of the rain. And then, in the dead of night, I heard it again. I turned my head toward the bedroom window, and this time, I saw it clearly. A child's pale face, black eyes staring in at me from the second-floor window. That was impossible. There was no balcony outside that window, and the child was smiling at me. I moved into this house about 3 months ago, a colonial-style home in a quiet suburb with long hallways and high ceilings. At first, I loved its classic design. The grand wooden doors, the creaky hardwood floors, and the large windows that let in plenty of sunlight. But the longer I stayed here, the more I felt that something was off. It started with the sounds. The first night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Slow, heavy footsteps, pacing back and forth. I brushed it off as exhaustion from moving in, but the noises continued. Every night, around 2 a.m., the footsteps returned. Sometimes they were accompanied by soft breathing, right outside my bedroom door. I started feeling uneasy but tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises, pipes, shifting wood. I told myself it was normal, until the night I saw it. I was sitting in my home office, working on some documents. The hallway outside was dark, except for the faint glow coming from my bedroom at the end of the corridor. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, a tall, black silhouette stood motionless in the hallway. It had no discernible features, just a dark, human-like shape that radiated an oppressive presence. I stared at it, frozen, and then, within seconds, it vanished. I turned on every light in the house, searching every room, but found nothing. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, some trick of the light. But the shadow returned, night after night. Sometimes it stood in the hallway. Sometimes it appeared in the mirror when I wasn't looking directly at it. One night, I woke up to find it standing in the corner of my bedroom, watching me in silence. I don't know who or what haunts this house, but I do know one thing. Every night, when the lights go out and darkness fills the house, I am never truly alone. I never believed in ghost stories. Old houses often make strange noises, expanding wood, creaking pipes, or maybe my scurrying inside the walls. But ever since I moved into this house, I started questioning that logic. It all began with the noises from the attic. I first noticed them about 2 weeks after moving in. Every night, just after turning off the lights and settling into bed, I heard faint creaking noises above me. It sounded like slow, deliberate footsteps moving across the attic floor. At first, I ignored it. maybe a raccoon or a trapped bird. But the noises became more frequent and worse. Sometimes I could hear breathing. One night, I finally gathered the courage to check. I grabbed a flashlight, pulled down the attic ladder, and climbed up slowly. A cold draft greeted me, along with the scent of dust and decay. I scanned the attic with my flashlight. It was empty, just a few old boxes left behind by the previous owner. I was about to go back down when I noticed something in the corner. A mattress. A filthy, dust-covered mattress. Someone had been living up here. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my nerves. Maybe the previous owner had let someone stay up here. But why hadn't anyone told me? I went back down, uneasy but determined to forget about it. But the nights only got worse. One night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps above my ceiling, louder than before. And then, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The attic door opened. I barely dared to breathe. I could hear the pull-down ladder unfolding slowly, its rusty hinges screeching in the silence of the night. I couldn't move. I could only stare at my bedroom door, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. And then, I heard the footsteps in the hallway. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying this was all just a nightmare. But before I lost consciousness from sheer terror, I heard one final sound, the sound of heavy breathing right beside my bed. I had just moved into this house a few weeks ago, a Victorian-style home with red brick walls and large windows. I lived alone, enjoying the solitude after years of cramped apartment life in the city. But from the very first night, something felt off. At first, it was just a feeling of being watched. Not the usual paranoia, but something more tangible, as if unseen eyes lurked in the dark corners of the house. I ignored it, assuming it was just the effect of adjusting to a new place. Then, one night, the house phone rang. That was odd because I had never used the landline since moving in. I didn't even know if it was still active. Hesitantly, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" I asked. Silence. Then, a faint breathing sound. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly hung up, dismissing it as a wrong number. But minutes later, the phone rang again. This time, when I answered, a voice whispered, "You are not alone." I froze. The voice was soft, almost intimate, as if someone was right next to me. Panicked, I slammed the phone down and tried to brush it off. But later that night, I heard something far worse. Footsteps, coming from downstairs. I lived alone. There shouldn't be anyone else in the house. Grabbing my cell phone, I tried to dial 911, but before I could press the numbers, the landline rang again. I didn't want to answer it, but fear and curiosity compelled me. With trembling hands, I lifted the receiver and brought it to my ear. This time, the whisper was even closer. "I'm inside the house." I turned toward the staircase, my heart hammering in my chest. In the dim light, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the end of the hallway, a closet door was slowly creaking open, and from the darkness inside, a pair of pale eyes stared directly at me. I bought this house at an unbelievably low price, too low for a two-story home in such a quiet neighborhood. But I didn't question it. I just assumed I got lucky. The first few days were normal, but there was one thing that unsettled me: the small door under the staircase. It wasn't a regular door. It was shorter than standard size, made of older wood that didn't match the rest of the house. I assumed it was just a storage space, but every time I walked past it, I felt something watching me. I ignored the feeling until one night, I woke up to a knocking sound. I froze, trying to determine where it was coming from. It took me a moment to realize the sound was coming from under the stairs. I held my breath, waiting to see if it would stop. But the knocking came again. 3 soft taps. With my heart pounding, I slowly walked toward the staircase. The air felt colder than usual. As I reached the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The door was slightly open, just a small gap, but enough to reveal the darkness inside. I couldn't explain why, but I knew something was in there. I quickly shut the door and locked it, convincing myself it was just my imagination. But the next night, the door was open again. And this time, I didn't just hear knocking. I heard whispers, a faint, childlike voice calling my name. On the third night, I made a terrible mistake. I opened the door. I shone my flashlight into the small space. There was nothing but dust and old brick walls. But as I moved the light further into the corner, I saw it. A child, sitting with his back to me. His body was thin, his messy black hair covering his face. His clothes were old and tattered. "What are you doing here?" I whispered. The child didn't move. I took a step back, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then, slowly, his head began to turn toward me, but his body didn't move at all. His face was deathly pale, his eyes pitch black, void of pupils. His mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide grin. Before I could scream, the house lights went out. In the darkness, I heard the sound of tiny footsteps rushing toward me. And then, I felt an ice-cold hand grab my ankle. I've always loved houses with a classic design, and this one had everything. High ceilings, old wooden floors, and a long hallway connecting the living room to the upstairs bedrooms. It was in that hallway that I found the mirror. A large, antique mirror mounted on the wall, as if it had been there for decades. Its wooden frame was intricately carved, its color faded with age. I didn't remember buying or placing it there, but I assumed it was just part of the house. The first night, I noticed something strange. Whenever I passed by the mirror, something felt off. Nothing obvious, just a vague sensation that my reflection moved slightly slower than I did. I ignored it, assuming it was just the lighting. But over time, the discrepancies became more noticeable. One night, as I walked past, I glanced at the mirror and saw something that made my blood turn cold. My reflection was staring back at me, but its eyes didn't blink. I froze, heart pounding. I moved my hand. My reflection followed. I blinked, testing myself. Everything seemed normal, but as I turned to walk away, I caught something in my peripheral vision. My reflection was still looking at me, even though I had turned away. I stopped breathing. I snapped my head back toward the mirror, but everything appeared normal again. The nights that followed only got worse. I started seeing small movements that didn't belong. Sometimes, when I walked past without looking directly, I felt something inside the mirror, watching me. The worst night was when I decided to stare directly into the mirror for a long time. I wanted to prove to myself that nothing was wrong. I stood in front of it, staring at my own reflection. I waited. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. 5 minutes. Nothing. I almost laughed at how ridiculous I was being. But just as I turned to leave, my reflection did not turn with me. I felt ice crawl up my spine. Slowly, I turned back toward the mirror. My reflection was still staring at me. And now, it was smiling too wide. Then, before I could react, it raised its hand and knocked on the glass from the inside. The sound echoed through the silent hallway. I ran to my room and locked the door, but I knew one thing for certain. This mirror was not just a mirror, and whatever was inside it wanted to get out. I always make sure my doors are locked before bed. Living alone in this house, I have a habit of checking every window and door at night. Nothing can get in without me knowing. But one night, someone knocked on my front door. I glanced at the clock. 2:13 a.m. Who would come at this hour? I peeked out the living room window, but under the dim porch light, I saw no one. Just my empty front yard bathed in moonlight. Maybe I misheard it. I turned to go back to my room, but before I could take another step, the knocking came again, louder this time. A chill ran down my spine. Carefully, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. No one was there. I started feeling uneasy. Maybe it was just some kids playing a prank. But as I took a step back, I heard something that made my blood run cold. The knocking was now coming from the back door. I ran to the kitchen and peeked through the back window. No one was there. I tried to convince myself this was just my imagination, maybe the wind or a random noise from outside. But before I could think further, the back door rattled. Someone, or something, was trying to open it. I stepped back slowly, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone to call the police, but just as I unlocked the screen, this time, the knocking came from my bedroom window. I turned, my body frozen. I knew I didn't want to look, but something inside me forced me to glance. Outside the window, pressed against the fogged-up glass, stood a figure. Not a normal person. Its face was pale and elongated, its eyes too large, its mouth stretched too wide. It didn't move, just stood there, grinning, staring at me without blinking. I ran to my bedroom and locked the door. From outside, I heard a sound I will never forget. From inside my house, I never liked attics. Something about dark, cramped spaces above my head always made me uneasy. But since moving into this house, that unease turned into something worse, fear. The first week was normal. I never even thought about the attic until one night when I heard a strange sound above my bedroom. A soft scraping, like something slowly moving across the ceiling. I tried to ignore it. Old houses make noises, right? But the next night, the sound returned. This time, it wasn't just scraping. I started hearing whispers. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice was definitely coming from the attic. I told myself it was my imagination, but a few days later, I found something that made it impossible to ignore. While cleaning my room, I noticed something on the floor. Tiny splinters of wood. I looked up. There, in the middle of my bedroom ceiling, was something that shouldn't be there. A small hole. And inside that darkness, I saw an eye. I stumbled backward, heart pounding. I blinked, and the eye was gone. I had to check. I had to know what was up there. With shaking hands, I grabbed a ladder and pulled the attic door string. The hinges creaked loudly as it opened. A cold draft hit me, carrying the scent of dust and something rotten. I shone my flashlight inside. The attic was empty, or so I thought, until I saw something in the corner. There was a sleeping area, a pile of dirty blankets, food wrappers, and, most disturbingly, photos of me. Some photos were taken inside my house, from angles I couldn't have noticed. One of them was taken through the hole in my bedroom ceiling. My chest tightened. I wanted to run, but before I could move, the whisper came from right behind me. Someone breathed into my ear. I didn't dare turn around. I jumped down, slammed the attic door shut, and locked my bedroom. Outside, I could still hear it. Soft laughter, and then footsteps moving toward the attic door. When I moved into this house, I didn't know I was the only resident on this street. It was an old house at the very end of a dead-end road, surrounded by towering trees that made it feel even more isolated. When I first arrived, I wondered why every other house on the street was empty. Their windows were boarded up, their doors locked tight, as if they had been abandoned for years. But I didn't think much of it. The house was spacious, affordable, and I needed it. The first night, I heard something, not from inside the house, but from outside. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunching on the gravel road in front of my house. I peeked through the window. The street was empty. No one was there. But the footsteps kept going, as if someone was pacing back and forth just beyond my sight. I tried to sleep, convincing myself it was nothing. But just as I was drifting off, a knock at the front door. Slowly, I got out of bed. Holding my breath, I crept toward the door and peered through the peephole. No one was there. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. But as I turned to go back to my room, the knocking came again. I froze. I didn't want to look through the peephole again, but something compelled me to. With trembling hands, I leaned in and looked outside. And there, standing in the middle of the dark street, was someone, tall, thin, and wrong. Its head tilted slightly, its face obscured by shadows, but I could see its eyes. Too white, no eyelids, just two pale orbs staring straight at my door. I stumbled back. I wanted to shut every curtain, lock myself in my room, but as I took a step away, the knocking came from the back of the house. I ran to the kitchen, looking out the back window. It was there, that same figure, its eerie white eyes fixed on me. But there was something far worse. My back door was unlocked. I lunged toward it, trying to shut it before anything could get inside. But as I grabbed the handle, a pale hand touched mine from the other side. I screamed, jerking back, and slammed the door shut with all my strength. I locked it, my breath ragged, my body shaking violently. Silence. I thought it was over, until I noticed something that made my blood turn to ice. I looked toward the kitchen window, and there, beyond the glass, dozens of white eyes stared back at me. They stood outside, unmoving, watching. I don't know who they are. I don't know what they want. But I do know one thing. I was never truly alone on this dead-end street.